The agriculture sector is one of the world's biggest sources of climate-altering gases, the vast majority of which come from meat and dairy production. If cows were their own country, they would be the third biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the world. Farming also requires huge amounts of land. Forests, wetlands and savannas are carbon sinks. They absorb and store carbon, but when the ecosystems are chopped down to make way for farm, that land turns into a carbon source. A 2018 study found that 12.4 million acres of forest, the equivalent of more than 5 national Yellowstone parks, are cut down each year to clear room for industrial agriculture. A whopping 30% of Earth's ice-free landmass is used as pasture for livestock. Because of population increases and changes in diets as a global middle class grows, agriculture's emissions have been rising steadily. By 2050, when the world's population is projected to hit 10 billion, scientists anticipate it will use most of the humanity's annual carbon budget, the amount we emit without exceeding warming targets, just to feed everyone. Americans generate the equivalent of more than 16 metric tons of carbon dioxide per person per year, more than 3 times the global average. Since cows are most carbon-intensive part of the food industry, cattle are responsible for 62% of agricultural emissions. Eating fewer of them is one of the most powerful steps an individual can take toward protecting the planet. A 2017 study found that if every American swapped out all beef in their diet for the beans, it would get the United States halfway to meeting the 2020 greenhouse gas emission target laid out in Paris Climate Accord. Reducing beef consumption has advantages far beyond its effect on the climate, scientists say. Turning ranchland into forests will create new habitats and mitigate the effects of agriculture on water pollution. It will also make many people healthier. Many Americans, especially teen boys and men, consume far more protein than meat than nutrition experts recommend. If Earth's biggest beef eaters limited their consumption to the equivalent of 1.5 burgers per week, about half of what the average person currently eats, the planet could support a population of 10 billion people without having to turn any more forest into farmland. This shift would avoid about 5.5 billion tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions per year, the equivalent of emissions from 2 Indias. Your burger alone is not the cause of climate change, and swapping it for a bean patty won't solve the problem. It's true that governments and big corporations must limit fossil fuel production, curb industrial emissions and invest in green energy alternatives. But if we don't reduce emissions from agriculture, we're not going to be able to hit climate targets even if we get exactly right on fossil fuels. We need to act now before it's too late.